I want to sell this watch. Where did you get this? It belongs to my mother. You don't have to sell this today. I do. What if I help your mother first, and we figure out the watch later? He was holding his own memory of that watch when the little girl walked in trying to sell it. That sentence took 9 years to make sense. Here is how it happened. 7 years before Nadia walked into that antique shop with her mother's most precious secret wrapped in a dish towel, Caleb Whitfield still believed love was something a man could choose out loud. He was 30 then, the son of Richard Whitfield Sr., founder of Whitfield Capital Group, real estate, logistics, private equity, and the kind of generational wealth that never has to advertise itself, because entire rooms already know. Caleb wore the right clothes without thinking about them. He said the right things at the right dinners without feeling any of it. The future that had been built for him was spotless and suffocating in equal measure. Then he met Maya. She wasn't beautiful in the way rich men's women were supposed to be beautiful. That was the first thing that stopped him. He saw her at a hospital charity gala his aunt's foundation had organized. Caleb had come because his father believed being seen mattered, even when caring was optional. Maya worked in the hospital's patient records department and had stayed late helping the nurses prep intake files before the crowd arrived. She wore a plain dark blouse, her natural hair pulled back, small gold studs in her ears. She moved like someone who had mastered the art of being fully present without ever performing for anyone. She didn't look at his last name. She looked at him once, answered his question about the side entrance, and went back to work. He stood there longer than necessary, annoyed and inexplicably intrigued. "You work here?" he asked. "Yes. Aren't you supposed to be at the event?" She glanced at the stack of folders threatening to slide off the counter. "I'm still working at this hour." "Patience doesn't wait for galas," she said, without any attitude, just fact. That sentence stayed with him. He came back 3 days later with paperwork no one had asked him to deliver. Then again the following week. Then once more, with no excuse at all. "I wanted to see you," he finally admitted. Maya should have ended it right there. She knew how this story usually went, a wealthy man, curious for a season, gone by winter. She'd watched it play out for other women she respected, and she'd watched those same women try to put themselves back together afterward. She knew all of it before he did. But Caleb was careful with her, and that was his particular danger. He listened. He remembered. He showed up when he said he would. He learned which corner store she stopped at after night shifts. He knew her younger brother's college application mattered to her. He paid attention without turning that attention into control. When he finally asked her out properly, he didn't send a car. He stood outside the hospital at 9 at night holding 2 cold brew coffees from the cart down the block. "I know all the reasons you should say no," he told her. "Then why are you asking?" "Because I'd rather know the ending than spend forever wondering about it." She took the coffee. "This doesn't mean I trust you. Fair. Or your family. Or where this is headed." He nodded. "Neither do I. I just know I want to find out with you." It wasn't smooth. It was better than smooth, true enough to make her nervous. Their relationship grew in ordinary places. Diner booths, traffic with the windows down, weekend farmers markets where nobody cared that a man from the Forbes list was spending 2 hours arguing the merits of handmade hot sauce. He told her things he'd never said inside his father's house, that the company felt like a machine wearing his face, that every future already had his name stamped on it before he'd even arrived, that approval in his family always came wrapped in expectation. With Maya, he became less polished and more present. With Caleb, Maya became less guarded and more vulnerable than she liked. She let him meet her mother in southwest Atlanta, a small house, a tight yard, good food. Her mother watched him cut his chicken and said later, "A man raised with money can still love honestly. The question is what happens when the money starts screaming louder than the love." Maya laughed. Her mother didn't. By their second year together, Caleb had already decided, in his chest, that he would marry her. He just hadn't yet survived telling his father. Richard Whitfield Sr. was 61, square-shouldered, composed, and dangerous in the way certain men are dangerous, not through violence, but through infrastructure. He believed in hierarchy the way other men believe in God. He didn't think of himself as cruel. Cruel men who know they're cruel can at least feel shame. Richard thought of himself as protecting continuity. That word covered more damage than cruelty ever could. He heard about Maya the way men like him always hear about threats, as second-hand intelligence delivered in the language of concern. Drivers noticed things. Assistants observed. Cousins translated loyalty into information. By the time he called Caleb into the study, he already knew enough to be dangerous. A hospital records clerk, he said, standing by the window as though the whole city were on his side. You're throwing away everything we built for a woman with no standing. Caleb was 32. Under his father's gaze, old habits of deference still tugged at him. He fought them. Her name is Maya. And that's not the issue. It is to me. His father smiled the way men smile when they've mistaken emotion for leverage. You're free to have whatever private attachment you like. You are not free to make it the Whitfield legacy. This isn't about the company. I love her. That, his father said quietly, is exactly why you're not ready to run anything. What followed wasn't a dramatic argument, no raised voices, no shattered glass. Something worse, stillness, a strategic withdrawal. Richard understood something Caleb was still learning too slowly, that love survives opposition, but it struggles against quiet systems deployed methodically against it. The first moves came dressed as logistics. Caleb's travel schedule got rerouted. Maya's supervisor received a call about professional boundary concerns from someone on the hospital board. Her landlord suddenly had a nephew who needed her apartment. None of it was traceable. All of it was deliberate. Then Maya told him she was pregnant. She stood in the middle of his private apartment, the one he rented under an LLC, for the moments he needed to exist somewhere without the Whitfield name attached, hands clasped below her stomach, eyes braced for his reaction. He crossed the room and held her so hard she had to laugh through the tears. Did you hear me? She whispered against his chest. I heard you. You're not scared. I'm terrified. He pulled back just enough to see her face. His whole expression had shifted. Maya, I'm so happy. It scares me too. That made her cry for real. He knelt and pressed his forehead gently to her stomach, barely showing yet, and made a promise he didn't fully know how to keep. I won't let them erase you. I won't let them erase this baby. I swear it. He gave her the watch that same night. It had no famous ancestor attached to it, he'd found it in a London vintage shop years earlier because it felt like it belonged to a life he hadn't chosen yet. Silver, heavy, scratched near the hinge. He'd had it engraved himself, for our time. Nobody carries pocket watches anymore, Maya said softly, turning it over in her palm. A man who wants to mark the exact second his life became his own does. She smiled through tears. That's too much. It's not enough, he said, closing her fingers around it. Whatever happens, this time is ours. She repeated those words later in the dark, after he'd fallen asleep, like practice, like armor. For a few weeks they lived inside something tender and dangerous, names for the baby, secret prenatal visits, small plans. Maya bought a pair of knitted baby socks from a street vendor and hid them in her tote bag, because taking them out and looking at them too long made the future feel real enough to hurt. Then Richard made his move. He didn't confront Maya directly. Men who operate through systems don't soil themselves with direct confrontation when machinery is available. Instead, Maya got a call that her grandmother in Savannah had taken a bad fall and was asking for her urgently. The message was vague, the timing wrong, but family obligation isn't a switch you can just flip off, especially for a woman raised the way Maya was. Caleb was out of town on company travel. He couldn't get away without raising questions he wasn't ready to answer. He told her to wait one day. She said it was probably nothing, that she'd go down and be back by evening. That was the last conversation before the lie. The car never reached Savannah. What Caleb was told was that there'd been an accident on I-16. What actually happened was quieter and uglier. The car carrying Maya was intercepted past Macon by men who spoke politely and explained there was trouble on the road ahead, that they'd been sent to reroute her safely. She argued. She asked who had sent them. One of the men told her, almost apologetically, that some families don't negotiate when their legacy is threatened. She tried to open the door while the car was still moving. That was the accident. The vehicle swerved off the shoulder and rolled into a drainage ditch thick with brush. The driver died. Maya didn't, but by the time other drivers stopped and emergency crews arrived, she'd suffered a head injury severe enough to shatter her memory into fragments. She couldn't say her name. She couldn't say who to call. She couldn't connect the silver watch found beside her to any face or voice. Richard's people moved faster than the ambulance report. A funeral was arranged around a different casualty from the same stretch of highway, an identification made through suggestion and managed paperwork, a coffin kept closed, for mercy. Caleb was told a story of grief so efficient, delivered through family structure and urgency, that even a sharp man could swallow it whole. He buried Maya without ever seeing her face. He also buried the child he believed had died with her. The months that followed hollowed him out. He worked. He traveled. He answered emails. He sat in board meetings and said the right things in a voice that sounded like his own. People said grief sometimes matures a man. What they really meant was that sorrow had made him easier to direct. He never married. He came close twice, because proximity to suitable women had been engineered long enough that refusing became conspicuous, but both times, something in him stopped short of the ceremony. His father called it unresolved sentiment. Caleb called it an unfinished grave. Maya woke in a county hospital in central Georgia with no context for her own life. She felt pain first, then heard voices, then a nurse saying the baby is strong before the light went flat again. She could speak. She could answer questions about the present. What she couldn't do was reach the past. Her name, her family, the silver watch wrapped in gauze beside the bed that made her cry without knowing why. All of it sat behind a wall of broken glass and fog. The hospital intake listed her as Jane Doe until an older woman named Miss Odessa, who ran a second-hand clothing booth outside the county hospital and had watched too many people fall through the cracks to let another one disappear, recognized that the young pregnant woman had no one coming for her. She took Maya home to her place in Warner Robins after discharge. Not out of sentiment, but out of the stubborn moral instinct of someone who refuses to let the discarded stay that way. Maya gave birth to a daughter 6 weeks later, during a heavy rainstorm. The baby screamed so fiercely that the attending nurse laughed and said, "This one came back from somewhere angry." Maya named her Nadia. The name arrived from nowhere and made her chest ache in a way that felt like memory knocking from the wrong side of a locked door. The watch never left her. She didn't know who had given it to her. She only knew that whenever Miss Odessa gently suggested selling it during the hard months, a panic rose in her so complete that even practical Miss Odessa eventually stopped asking. She kept it wrapped in cloth at the bottom of a storage bin, alongside Nadia's birth records, clinic cards, and the fragments of a life slowly rebuilt around not knowing. The years moved the way hardship moves when no miracle interrupts it. Maya worked whatever she could find, sorting inventory at a distribution warehouse, cleaning offices on the second shift, doing alterations badly at first and then well. She was patient with her co-workers, careful with Nadia, and prone to blank spells whenever a word or a smell or a city name made something flicker behind her eyes and vanish before she could hold on to it. Sometimes she dreamed of a man's voice saying, "Asterisk, this time is ours." Asterisk, she'd wake up crying with no explanation she could name. Nadia grew into the kind of child that poverty makes sharp. By 7, she understood how money changes adult behavior. She knew which days her mother's smile was on loan. She knew which medicines were being rationed because groceries had to come first. She knew the silver watch in the bin mattered more than anything else they owned, though she didn't know why. Miss Odessa passed away that year. They kept the room and the neighborhood's goodwill and little else that resembled safety. Maya's headaches worsened. The fainting spells increased. The clinic doctor said more tests were needed, possibly old injury scarring, possibly something vascular, the kind of maybe that turns expensive before it turns clear. Nadia sat on the waiting room bench and counted the prescriptions they couldn't afford to fill. The day she found the watch, her mother was asleep and breathing unevenly after a dizzy spell. Nadia opened the storage bin looking for the small emergency envelope where a few folded bills were sometimes kept. Instead, her fingers found the silver watch. She turned it over, pressed the latch, and watched it open. For our time, she couldn't read all the words, but she recognized value. Value has a particular shine, and children raised in scarcity learn to spot it faster than any school could teach them. That was how she ended up in Atlanta. Not through some neatly arranged fate, but through one practical, desperate, child-sized decision after another. She rode north before dawn with a neighbor, telling no one except the woman in the next unit, who assumed she was visiting a relative, and arrived in a city bigger than her fear with a watch wrapped in a dish towel under her dress. She found the antique shop by chance, or what looks like chance before the story explains itself. Caleb had a partial ownership stake in the shop through a heritage retail acquisition one of his companies had absorbed. He didn't usually sit there, but that afternoon, a cancelled meeting, a restless mind, his father's voice still echoing off the walls of his office, he'd come here instead of going back upstairs. He was 39 now. Grief had refined him into someone others found steady, someone women often called kind in the careful tone reserved for men carrying old injuries. He wore success well because he'd been trained to, but there were shadows under his eyes and a silence in the pauses between his sentences that people found either romantic or worrying, depending on how well they knew him. When Nadia stepped through the door, he was reviewing an invoice at the back counter with the store manager. Neither of them looked up right away. Kids drifted in sometimes with family treasures dressed up as heirlooms. Old coins, broken electronics, objects repurposed by necessity. The manager started his usual gentle redirect. "I want to sell something," Nadia said. Caleb looked up only because there was no childishness in her voice. She stood in the doorway, a small dress faded at the collar, sneakers worn through at the toe, hair in uneven puffs, trying hard to look older than she was. Her eyes were the kind that made adults uncomfortable if they weren't paying close attention. Too direct, too tired for her age. She unfolded the dish towel. The watch landed on the glass counter. Caleb went completely still, not gradually, entirely. The room seemed to change around him without a sound. He knew it before he even touched it, the scratch near the hinge, the specific weight, the sheer impossibility of that object lying on a shop counter under fluorescent light, in front of a hungry-looking little girl who couldn't have been more than 7. His hand reached for it before his thoughts caught up. When he opened it and saw the engraving, something old and long buried tore through him so fast he nearly dropped it. "For our time." He sat down without planning to. The manager said something that seemed to come from very far away. He looked at the girl. "Where did you get this?" She stepped back. Children read adult intensity faster than adults believe they do. "It's my mother's." "What's your mother's name?" She hesitated. "Good, cautious. Cautious children survive longer." "Maya." The shop disappeared. Not physically, completely. 9 years folded inward between one sentence and the next until Caleb felt like a man standing at the edge of his own existence, watching it fracture. He didn't press her with more questions right away. The girl was frightened, and real shock teaches restraint faster than any social training ever could. "You don't have to sell this today," he said carefully. "I do," Nadia replied. The firmness in those 2 words landed somewhere specific in him. "What if I help your mother first, and we figure out the watch later?" Children raised on scarcity don't trust offers. Nadia looked at him, then at the manager, then at the door, calculating the geometry of an escape route with a precision that would have undone him even if he hadn't already begun to understand the truth. Why? He chose the truest answer he could give her without shattering her. "Because someone gave me that watch to hold on to, and I'd like to earn the right to explain that." Nadia studied him for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and held out a folded clinic card. He looked at the address and the diagnosis notes. He was already moving. He drove himself to Warner Robins, no assistant, no call ahead, no preparation for what he was about to see. Maya's rented room sat behind a laundromat and a tire shop, in a low brick complex where shared hardship had been converted, out of necessity, into a reluctant kind of community. Nadia led him through the door. He had to grip the doorframe for a full second, because grief, when it resurrects without warning, can hit like a physical blow. Maya lay on a low bed near the window. Thinner than memory, older in the face than 9 years should have made her, her hair pulled back loosely from sleep, one hand resting on her forehead, the other open beside her. Empty. Alive. The word felt too small for what it carried. She opened her eyes at the sound of his footstep and looked at him with ordinary caution, a sick woman, a stranger, a man standing in her room with her child behind him. "Nadia," she said, her voice rough. "I brought someone," Nadia said carefully. "He says he can help." Maya pushed herself upright too fast and winced. "Who are you?" Caleb had imagined this moment without ever admitting to himself he was imagining it. Across 9 years of grief, no version of it had included surviving it. "My name is Caleb." The name moved across her face like weather, something disturbed the surface, then passed. "I don't know you." "No," he said softly. "You don't." That was the beginning of everything. Within 48 hours he'd moved them to Atlanta, not to the Whitfield estate, but to a quiet furnished residence connected to a company trust. A live-in nurse, a neurologist appointment, groceries stocked without any discussion of cost. He told the staff they were under his personal protection, and that phrase carried enough weight in his world to suspend questions for a while. Maya accepted the help with suspicion. Memory loss hadn't taken her instincts. She let the doctors run their tests. She let Nadia finally sleep without anxiety for the first time in months. But whenever Caleb visited, she watched him the way you listen for something moving underneath a conversation. On the 3rd day she said, "You look at me like I owe you something." He leaned back in his chair. "Not remembering isn't owing." Her face shifted. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Say things that make my head feel full." He closed his eyes briefly. "I'm sorry." The apology mattered. She'd known men with resources who only apologized when it cost them nothing. The doctors confirmed what the county clinic had feared, a traumatic brain injury, old scarring, episodic dissociation worsened by years of untreated stress and inadequate follow-up care. Her memory loss had never been a total blank, it was more like a house where every door had been broken off its frame. Language remained. Emotional instinct remained. Autobiographical memory had shattered on impact and been left to scar over in hardship instead of being treated while it might still have healed. "Can it come back?" Caleb asked. The neurologist answered carefully. "Parts of it are already returning, whether she recognizes them or not. Emotionally charged triggers, objects, phrases, locations, can unlock access. Stress can either block it or force it. Full integration is possible. Not guaranteed. He looked at the watch sitting on the desk and didn't rush anything. He paid the bills quietly. He let Nadia set the pace of trust. He brought food he remembered Maya loving 9 years earlier and said nothing when she ate it without a flicker of recognition. He answered Nadia's questions honestly when he could, and gently when he couldn't. On the 5th evening, while he was tying her sneaker, Nadia asked, "Why do you look sad when my mom is sleeping?" He paused. "Because I'm trying to remember something important." She considered that. "Maybe you should sleep more too." He laughed, unexpectedly. She looked pleased. That laugh arrived without his permission, and it startled him. He hadn't heard his own joy move that freely in years. He began quietly pulling records, the accident report, the state patrol log, the funeral paperwork, the hospital transfer chain, the timeline of calls made from his father's office the week Maya allegedly died. He used the kind of resources powerful men use only when something other than profit finally matters: quiet investigators, a retired driver who remembered more than his severance package was supposed to buy, a former personal assistant whose loyalty had worn thin along with his retirement savings. The picture that emerged was hideous and precise. His father hadn't just lied. He had engineered the intercepted car, the substituted casualty, the rushed funeral, the suppression of survivor intake records under a different county filing, the quiet payments, the assumption that grief would finish what force had started. The confrontation happened in the same study where every war in that house had ever started, same shelves, same afternoon light across the same hardwood floor. Caleb set the copied police reports and witness statements on the desk between them. His father read the top page and exhaled, not guilt, irritation. She would have derailed everything. You derailed it. I protected what mattered, beyond your temporary feelings. She was carrying my child. His father's eyes sharpened but didn't soften. Then I protected more than one future from an error in judgment. That sentence made restraint feel like the hardest physical act of Caleb's life. His knuckles whitened against the edge of the desk. Do you hear what you're saying? Perfectly clearly. Do you? Richard leaned back. You were not some entry-level associate chasing instinct into chaos. You were the continuation of something larger than any one relationship. I removed a complication before it became permanent. She was a person. She is a person. A flicker of something crossed his face. She was a woman you loved at the wrong moment, in the wrong position. My daughter is 9 years old. Yes, his father replied, without a hint of warmth, and still alive. You should consider the restraint that represents. Caleb looked at the man who had raised him and understood two things at once: that his father loved him, in his own way, and that the way was monstrous. He left without another word, because staying would have required an action he couldn't take back. The storm came on a Tuesday evening. Real weather, a heavy late fall rain that arrived in the afternoon and deepened toward dark until the city looked both washed clean and scraped raw. Nadia had been restless all day, cooped up inside, drawing families and watches and rain on the backs of grocery bags. The adults around her moved like people waiting for something they didn't want to name. Maya had been better that morning. By evening, she was worse. The neurologist had warned them about this: the memory agitation that comes before integration, the brain cycling through approach and retreat before the door finally swings open. Nadia had been carrying the watch around the apartment, clicking it open and shut. They kept asking her to put it down. She kept forgetting. When Maya finally snapped for the noise to stop, Nadia, overstimulated, overtired, already trembling at the thunder outside, grabbed the watch and bolted into the hallway before anyone could stop her. They assumed she'd gone to the common area. The nurse checked. Caleb checked. The building security guard checked. The rain kept intensifying. She wasn't anywhere inside. Maya's face went white in a way that had nothing to do with memory loss and everything to do with being a mother. Nadia, Caleb was already through the exterior door. The search lasted 11 minutes. It felt like the distance between one life and the next. They found her under the awning of a small church 2 blocks down, crouched beside a woman selling roasted peanuts who had pulled the crying child out of traffic when she saw her running in the rain. Nadia was soaked and shaking, but safe. The watch was clutched in both hands against her chest. When Maya reached her, she dropped to her knees on the wet pavement and pulled her daughter so hard against her that Nadia made a small sound of protest before dissolving into tears. "Don't leave me," Maya kept saying. "Don't you leave me." Caleb reached them seconds later, lungs burning, his heart still swinging from the possibility that he'd almost lost his daughter the exact same way he'd lost everything else, through one small gap in time. Undefended, he knelt beside them under the church overhang while the rain beat the metal roof like something trying to get back in. Maya's hands moved over Nadia's face and shoulders, proving safety by touch. The watch slipped from Nadia's fingers and fell onto the wet concrete, snapping open. Caleb picked it up. The wind moved the church's door rope. The rain blurred the streetlight. Maya looked at the open silver face, at the engraving. *for our time. And Caleb, not planning it, not calculating anything, just existing in that moment, said the exact words he had spoken the night he first placed it in her hands, 9 years before. "No matter what happens, this time is ours." The world detonated inside her. Maya went still in a way that frightened him more than crying would have. Then everything returned at once. His apartment, his face kneeling before her, the confession, the watch in her palm, the car, the men, one of them saying something about families and inconvenience, the vehicle spinning, the hospital ceiling, the child at her chest. 9 years of grief arriving without a name. Dreams with no faces. The shape of his voice, singing a promise like a sacred word. Her body folded forward before any sound came out. He caught her. "Maya." She looked at him. Not vaguely, not like a stranger testing out a name. She looked at him with the full weight of 9 years landing in a single second. "Caleb." Then, quieter, breaking open completely, "You buried me." He was crying before he could answer. So was she. Nadia pressed herself between them, because children close the distance that adults collapse into when grief finally becomes honest. Recovery after memory returns isn't the same thing as healing. Maya didn't wake up the next morning into romance. She woke with a migraine so severe she couldn't keep water down, then cried for an hour trying to braid Nadia's hair, because memory hadn't come back as a clean sequence, it came back as a flood. She knew him. She knew about the pregnancy. She knew the shape of what his father had done. And she knew every version of herself that had been forced to survive without the context of her own love story. 3 nights after the storm, Nadia asleep and the city quiet after the rain, Maya sat by the window holding the watch. "I remember one of them telling me I should have taken the money and disappeared gracefully," she said. Caleb stood against the far wall, because sitting felt too soft for this. "I'm sorry." She looked up sharply. "Stop apologizing for a choice you didn't make. Your father made it." "Yes, but if I let my apology stand in for what he did, I'm charging the wrong account." He nodded once. "Then what do you need from me?" She looked down at the watch. "Don't come near me like memory means I'm standing exactly where you left me. I'm not that woman. I'm every woman who came after." He respected it. So the reunion became something more honest than the usual story allows. He didn't reclaim her, he re-met her. He learned the woman who had built a life without any context for it, the mother forged under pressure, the one who measured resources differently, who slept lightly, who distrusted ease, and who no longer took beautiful promises at face value in the dark. When Nadia asked directly, 2 weeks after the storm, "Are you my dad?" Neither of them ducked behind the usual adult evasions. Caleb knelt down. Yes. She studied him. Then where were you? He didn't say he'd been lied to. He didn't say he'd been grieving. He didn't say he hadn't known. He said the harder, honest thing. I wasn't where I should have been. She studied him further. Are you here now? He nearly broke. Yes. Okay, she said. Then don't go again. He didn't. The public collapse of Richard Whitfield Sr. came first through reputation, then through board displacement, then through the particular silence of men who stop returning calls. Shareholders dislike scandal. Church communities dislike a false burial more than most sins, because one embarrasses morality while the other embarrasses prestige. Criminal exposure proved legally complicated, the paper trail had been deliberately thinned, intermediaries were dead or paid off. But civil liability, public disgrace, and the specific loneliness of watching your own name become a cautionary tale cut through armor that a courtroom might never have reached. Richard stepped down as chairman. He wasn't invited to the foundation gala. Old associates answered his messages later and later, until they stopped answering at all. Caleb visited him once more, not to reconcile, but to set terms. Maya decides if she ever sees you. Nadia will know the shape of what you did, not every detail, but the shape. You don't come near either of them without an invitation. His father stared at him with something close to bewilderment. I made you. No, Caleb said. You managed me. She made me. He didn't need to say Maya's name. The room understood anyway. The real ending was quieter than any of that. It came months later, at Nadia's school spring program, plastic folding chairs, a microphone that kept cutting out, kids in mismatched costumes, parents fanning themselves with programs under a tent. Maya wore a blue dress. Caleb sat beside her, not in front, not slightly apart, but exactly where family should have been all along. Nadia was reciting a short poem. Halfway through, she lost her place and her eyes swept the audience in a small panic. She found them, both of them, together, and because kids aren't interested in subtlety when actual joy is available, she smiled so completely that her teacher later told someone the whole tent seemed to lift. Maya took Caleb's hand, not hidden, not performed, just returned to where it belonged. He looked at her. She looked back and said softly, "This time is ours." Later, on the balcony of the apartment they'd chosen together, after Nadia had finally fallen asleep, Caleb placed the watch in Maya's open hand. "This stopped being mine the night I gave it to you," he said. "I was just holding the pieces." She opened it, smiling through tears at the engraving. "For our time," she whispered. "And everything after," he answered. She looked at him then with full knowledge of everything in between. The love, the theft, a road in the dark, 9 years of surviving without a name for her own grief, a child who had once walked into a shop carrying a compressed family history wrapped in a dish towel. Then she said the line that closed the whole story. They stole 9 years. They don't get the rest. Some things wait patiently for the right witness. A watch. A name.